be on Facebook Live with us, or you may be on WMUA Amherst listening to our rebroadcast. We're doing a rebroadcast every day, the day after we do it on Facebook Live. Now, on Facebook, we have our own page, The Free Associates. Check out our awesome business card. I'm going to blind you with the light. Watch out. You're about to get blinded. Oh, because that's gold, baby. Because Cody does that. He's a black and gold man. Look at that logo. Look at that card. That card could be yours, but you have to be good. And then my other show, Barbarian in the Valley. Now, we are an expert-free zone. We don't do experts. However, our guest today, it could be an expert. It could be an expert on this topic. It's hard to say. If he is, we'll give him a brutal smackdown just based on principle. But we're just trying to figure things out. We enter the conversation not totally sure. We leave the conversation not totally sure because the world is vast and so hard to understand. And we free associate. We just let our minds wander because the power of looseness in conversation is the power of progress through conversation. I just made that up. You know why I just made up a slogan like that? I'm loose, man. I'm loose as a goose. And I'm free associating. Whale Dog, how you doing, man?
Good. I figured out a lot of stuff with the live stream today, and like I said before, I think I was talking to you like 30 seconds ago. Yep. It feels like water, when you get water stuck in your ear and it comes out, it's just, I have a new sense of clarity on all this. It feels good.
Well, I think you're probably like me. When my stuff is broken, I am not well. If my computer's broken, there's like this nagging thing that goes on, or my car or anything. I feel like it's an extension of my ability. Yeah. So you, of course, are doing miracles over there because Waylon is not just a guest on the show. He is also, believe it or not, like running this whole show as it comes along. So that's pretty tremendous.
The Puppet Master and take 3 screen and back to Norm.
Yeah. And boom.
Graphic for Norm in 3, 2, 1, take. Boom. And off graphic, 3, 2, 1, take. That's what I would be doing if I was behind.
That's what would you be doing if you were pro behind the scenes, but you're actually a pro right here. And I used to be the Puppet Master, and now you're the Puppet Master. How did that happen, man? I used to be running the show.
Multitasking extraordinaire over here.
Well, that's what it is. Well, listen, we have a very special free associate guest from our free associate bullpen, and that's Sam Stoddard. Sam, how you doing, man?
Pretty good. How are you guys?
We're good. We got to teach you Zoom etiquette, man, because we're looking up at you. And there's also like, no, don't freak out.
How's that doing for my double chin? Not well.
This is a little better. You might also want to like clean your lens at some point. Okay. It doesn't have to be now. So folks, we've been looking at little articles, little predictions in Politico. And I have to say, I've been a little bit like disappointed by them, but that doesn't mean our conversation around them isn't worthwhile. They do seem to have Waylon, what's your thoughts so far on these? We're about 7, 8 deep. What are you thinking about these predictions?
I think it's nice to have these discussions and everything. I just think that if we've seen anything out of this entire kind of mess, it's that things are not predictable. And it's just every single time the goalposts move and like things are moving at such a weird speed that, I like hypothesizing about all this stuff, but at the end of the day, no one knows what the hell they're talking about.
Well, I think that's fair. And I also think, Politico asked these thinkers to chime in. And of course they're going to. I think any one of them, if they were in the room with us, would be like, I don't actually really know. They asked me to write something. And it seems like whatever they write about is what their expertise is. I mean, you can't fault them for that. Yeah. So I think that, we're kind of knocking down bowling pins here, but I'm sure a lot of them would be like, hey, give me a break. They asked me to do this. I did it. What are we going to do? Now, Sam, you are a visiting professor in Worcester, right? And you were at Holy Cross, and you're teaching kids virtually online, not kids, young adults. Is that right?
Yeah, they're definitely one or the other.
Yes. Well, it's right at that age, where a kid becomes a young adult. And how's that been going for you?
Actually, it's been surprisingly great. I was pretty wary about it. And, it does make it a little bit harder to get the interaction and stuff. But Zoom is pretty awesome. And I've been impressed with how well it works. I mean, we teach our regular classes. We have our regular, 3 times a week, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, same time. It's almost like the real thing, just with less driving.
So and how many crazy, just to interject, I don't know if you've been following the security updates and all the things that are going on with Zoom, but the Department of Education banned the use of Zoom. And I just couldn't, like, I think one, that was premature, but I was just like, I can't help to think that some of the onus falls on the individuals that are using the platform, that they need to kind of, we have to do this like quickly and fast. It's a lot that we have to understand, but there's certain things that you have to kind of like go in and see all the features and just get yourself acquainted with this. So when I heard that the Department of Education in New York put a halt to it, I was like, is this going to do more hurt than good type thing? But just interesting thing to think about.
Well, I want to talk to you about that later, because I thought we were allowed to use Zoom.
No, we are. That was Department of Education for New York.
NYC. You know, Sam used to teach in the New York City public schools, as did I for a year.
Beautiful bureaucracy. So clearly some wise folks pulled the strings on that one.
Well, I'll tell you, if one politician's taken a dive on this whole thing, it's Bill de Blasio. He's just been
he's getting hammered.
He's just so goofy compared to Cuomo. He's got no chance up there.
Yeah, that's really true. Now, folks, let's move. Now we're gonna see how much we tackle today. We're gonna look at the first piece now. Interestingly enough, the whale dog and now, Sam, your moniker is Professor or Prof.Chaos. So yeah. that's your moniker nickname. Waylon immediately got that. I don't know. You said that's a South Park reference. I just don't know.
It's South Park reference, baby.
Butters.
Yeah.
Butters, Professor Chaos. Yes. Ineptitude and expertise rolled into one.
Exactly.
That's what I bring in.
There we
so
go.
This is a kind of reunion for us, because the Whale Dog and Prof. Chaos and I sat and we did probably in the winter or early spring, I can't totally remember, or even in the fall, a piece about Jonathan Rauch that was really quite good. And this one today is a prediction of his, short, and it's called New Forms of Reform. Jonathan Rauch is a contributing writer at The Atlantic and a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution. And it reads, one group of Americans has lived through a transformational epidemic in recent memory, gay men. Of course, HIV/AIDS was and is different in all kinds of ways from coronavirus, but one lesson is likely to apply. Plagues drive change. Partly because our government failed us, gay Americans mobilized to build organization networks and know-how that changed our place in society and have enduring legacies today. The epidemic also revealed deadly flaws in the healthcare system, and it awakened us to the need for the protection of marriage, revelations which led to landmark reforms. And that's quite interesting. I wouldn't be surprised to see some analogous changes in the wake of coronavirus. People are finding new ways to connect and support each other in adversity. They're sure to demand major changes in the healthcare system and maybe also the government. And they'll become newly conscious of interdependency and community. I can't predict, this is nice, he says this, I can't predict the precise effects, but I'm sure we'll be seeing them for years. All right, so that's Rauch's contribution to this Politico series. Sam, I'm going to kick it over to you first. What's your initial thoughts on this?
Well, I think he did a nice job doing what you were talking about, which is embracing the uncertainty here. He's not putting a stake in exactly what's going to happen, and I think he's kind of right. It's a nice analogy. I think that for gay Americans from, talking about the 1980s, they did really build an infrastructure that was clearly, obviously separate from government. And it took 40 years, but they eventually worked themselves into the mainstream of at least one political party and got some results. Unfortunately, as they probably would have told you at the time, in the 80s, they didn't really have that time to burn. And there was a lot of suffering that happened in the meantime. And it just feels like we're headed to a similar situation. My concern would be that the way that gay Americans were ostracized and kind of invisible, and their suffering was so invisible to society back in those days, could unfortunately end up being fairly analogous to just working class people in general right now. I know you probably don't want to pick apart the stimulus package as much as I do, but it's crumbs to the working people. And they have a long way to fight to get real government focused on their needs the same way that gay people did back then. And that's my big worry.
Yeah. Okay. Well, and these are two things that we've been trying to wrestle with simultaneously on every episode. There's the coronavirus, and then there's the economic aspects, that are going to follow it, which could be way bigger than the pandemic. I mean, easily could be bigger than a pandemic. Waylon, what's your take on this reading?
Yeah, well, the first thing I think that one thing that's absent here is just the enormous amount. I've been listening to podcast upon podcast about all of this, and one of the recollections of a nurse that had been in the practice for 30 years was the immediate response and reaction to the AIDS crisis. And the first patients that were coming in, they had no idea what they were dealing with. So it was this real apprehension, just similar to what we've experienced here, and this unpreparedness of the healthcare system to fight this unknown disease that was going on. So that first kind of that first like recoil is interesting to see and to analyze the similarities there. But then when it comes down to just how the response on both a policy level and a cultural level, it's going to be interesting to see some of those how stigmas play out for coronavirus. I mean, they're two different things when it really comes down to it, but there are similarities in the way that we kind of culturally perceive these things. Just thinking about just the stigma that has had a lasting legacy on the LGBTQ plus community versus what's happening with the origins of it being from China and it's spread through Asia. So there's a couple of things going on. It's going to be curious how we kind of look at those and analyze the ways that we're thinking about this culturally. But as far as solutions, I think that the governments are all kind of working hand in hand with each other. So I have no answers. I have no solutions, but it's just interesting to think about.
Well, here's my thing. I feel like I get why Roush has picked AIDS, HIV, but they're not super analogous situations, in my opinion. And he may concede that. He may say, well, I understand they're not totally the same, but they really aren't the same. One was a bloodborne pathogen, that was transmitted during sexual relations. And one is like an airborne pathogen that just can be coughed on. And so it has a very distinct thing that Boris Johnson's in a ventilator right now, the Prime Minister of England. So like I could see federal government being much more responsive to COVID than it was to AIDS. I mean, the government was notoriously negligent with AIDS. Like that's definitely a known piece of American history where the government felt like, well, we don't really have to deal with this. There were certain people in power who didn't even approve of that lifestyle, and they felt like it was a choice to get sick and stuff like that. I don't see this with that. I think this is obviously even just as a threat to the economy is something where government is going to have to step in. I don't see a bunch of small organizations building up to deal with COVID and stuff like that. I think the government is going to be really responsive to this, if for no other reason than to avert more economic calamity.
They're going to be responsive to the health consequences of it. Mm-hmm. But as far as economically, that's the worry, right? Is that it's however many months it is, 6 months, 12 months, 8, whenever this is over, health-wise, the economic problems are going to be the ones that linger. And that's when that's going to be less obvious to people. I mean, even right now, since they passed that stimulus, 2 weeks ago? Mm-hmm. Stock market's way up. They're not going to be giving any more help to working people as long as the stock market stays high because they don't see anything because they're not hearing it. That would be my concern. I agree with you health-wise. But I would take Jonathan's analogy of the invisible group suffering more as an economic one.
Okay. Yeah, well, that makes sense. I'm not sure that's what he's saying, but I agree with you that that's a definite threat and problem. And it's, as we were talking about yesterday, I mean, I do think the clock's ticking on our system in the sense of, we've had so many, there's a great Leonard Cohen line. To me, Leonard Cohen is a prophet. An actual prophet. You go and read his lyrics, especially his later lyrics too. They're unbelievable. And he has this line, he says, we asked for signs, the signs were sent. They were sent. We were looking for signs and they were sent. We've had one warning after another that our system is fragile and that representational government and capitalism, if it can't regulate itself, if it can't check itself, it doesn't take that much for things to become possible that we didn't think were possible before.
No, my question is what is the revolutionary system that replaces it? If you think I disagree with you in the sense that nothing's going to change. The system is so large that there's going to be reforms, but the reforms they're going to be little cosmetic things rather than a total overhaul of our system. So what huge overhauls do you think are going to come?
Well, first of all, let me say I think that's a fair question, and one you're putting me on the spot, so I'm gonna have to scramble a little bit, because that is a hard thing to answer. Now you could go with Keynesian type FDR. Sam's gonna want to take this, and Sam, I'm gonna push it over to you in a minute. Just hang on. But there's something else I wanted to say, which is separate, which is I don't know, I don't know if it's for me to present this, but I wouldn't underestimate if unemployment is at 18%, trust me, if you look at revolutionary models, that's one of your key indicators of tumult and revolt. Okay, like trust me, you look at any revolution, unemployment's a huge problem. With that. And it's not because people are poor, it's because people are dissatisfied and they have time to enact revolution. So Sam, why don't you had your hand up, why don't you take it? What reforms would you see? Or actually, let's stick with what Waylon's prompt.
I want to say radical system-changing reforms is what I'm talking about.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, I don't know. This isn't a hopeful prediction, but the place to start would be looking at medical infrastructure, right? Going off what you were just saying about free markets. What this is exposing, and this is, by the way, separate from any talk of like Medicare for all, which is also worth talking about, and everybody needs health insurance, and we can kind of see more how we're all connected, and my neighbor's health is my health, and that's so much more obvious now than it ever was. But a separate issue, and one that actually seems to be the most dire and immediate issue that's driving this crisis, is that our medical infrastructure isn't planning for the rainy day, because we have a hospital system that is and a medical system of providing care, not insurance, but of providing care, that's all for profit. And our hospital right down the street here, Cooley Dickinson, they have to make money in order to see themselves, that's how they see their way forward. And so the problem we have is, like, experts did know this was coming, despite what your president will tell you. This was totally foreseeable, not just like a pandemic, but like one that would cause a shortage of ventilators and a shortage of this PPE. That was obvious, but it makes no sense for any hospital to maintain, to keep a storage room filled with ventilators that they might use once every 10 or 20 years. It makes no sense for them to have, 10 times as much protective equipment in their warehouse as what they need.
Yeah, this is a real.
It can't be a business, and
not
so
only that, just to add to what you're saying, the United States government actually had a contract with a private company to make a stockpile of ventilators. That company was then bought out by a larger company, and the larger company pulled out of the deal. And so the actual government was working towards that, but because of the capitalist infrastructure that we had, the larger company already made ventilators, and they were seeing that contract with the government to stockpile them as a threat to their bottom profits.
Yeah, and they've been squashing. There have been less. I think I heard like $30,000 is what a ventilator is costing on the market these days. I mean, probably before they started driving the prices up. They've come out with models that are far, far cheaper, but there's no profit incentive in that. And so what happens is they get bought up and they squash them, just the way private companies act all the time in their own self-interest. But my point would be, we need maybe not a complete like government-run healthcare provision system, but what we need is government to at least step in and shore up the finances of these private institutions that we have providing our healthcare services, so that they can also occupy the public health, public security, save for a rainy day type role that we clearly all realize we need them to be doing. And they have no financial incentive to do that. It's bad business for them to do that. We need to make it an essential part of what they do.
Yeah. I mean, there's a very famous example. Chicago got a snowstorm and I don't know if it was 72 or 73, and it was just socked the city in for a week and a half. I mean, no one could move. And they were very low on plows. A lot of the plows they had broke during that snowstorm. So what do? The mayor goes out and he buys 600 new plows the next year. It didn't snow for like 7 years in Chicago. They all became obsolescent and rusted. I mean, here's a separate point. I feel like there's a lot of anger out there and a lot of pouncing on a situation that's like wildly complex, and it's hard to anticipate. Like, am I wrong to say that? I mean,
I actually think
I'm not getting much feedback here.
Well, I agree with you that we need to think about the healthcare component of this, absolutely. But there is a method to the madness, like Norm was saying. In the event that we're preparing for, PPE is one thing, but ventilators and ventilator technology might get cheaper, more efficient, more beneficial to the human condition, whatever we find ourselves in. So in stockpiling things, it actually reminds me of the government intervention in cheese. When we talk about government cheese, the government actually, it was this system that kind of became its own monster. The government was buying cheese to subsidize the cheese market, and then we had stockpiles of cheese. And then what do you do with this cheese? We had so much cheese that we couldn't get rid of it. So then it became waste, and then that waste became just this symbolism, this symbol for government waste. So you have to, even when we shift gears to thinking about the government doing all it can to stockpile and do all these things, that in and of itself there's going to be some waste attributed to that too. So it's either there's somewhere in the middle where it's like you don't want a razor thin profit margin guiding these private health companies to the point where we have only the things that we need on hand, while at the same time we don't want to stockpile ventilators in hopes that the next pandemic, if it happened 50 or 75 years from now, we have all these outdated pieces of technology that we've wasted money on, when we could have thought about the immediacy of using that money for social welfare programs or other ways to aid individuals.
Well, I think, and I just want to, Sam, I'll let you jump in just a second. I do want to. That's fine, and that's good, and that's a lively discussion. I just want to. Waylon's getting my back a little bit on that, and I do want to echo that. I feel like whoever's got their hands on the steering wheel is obviously going to get blamed for wherever the car goes, and it often goes off the road. Now, I think Americans have this illusion that resources of all kinds are infinite. They're just infinite, but that's just not the way it is. If you put a bunch of resources in ventilators, it comes out of somewhere else. It just does. And so to say like, well, where are all the ventilators? It's like, well, we were doing this other thing. Now, maybe it wasn't super equitable. And I do think obviously we've talked about this before, that the inequality in America is a huge harbinger of trouble ahead, it always is whenever it gets inequitable. But things aren't infinite. Where there's a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking saying like, well, where was this and where was that? Like, I don't want to let anyone off the hook, but I think it's also important to be like, well, you said we know it was coming. I mean, we knew it was coming in January or December, and we probably knew a pandemic was going to come. But these are like really hard choices. Obama said this. He said, the hardest part about being president is I get presented with all of these different choices, and I have to pick one, and I have to go out and pretend like it's the only one, because that's what politics is. But I know that actually it may not even be the right choice. I can't tell. There's 3 or 4 ways to go in this. So Sam, come on in on this.
It wasn't just January and December. I mean, I'm referring to government reports from 5 and 2 and 10 years ago that said that the likely thing we were going to run into would be a respiratory disease that would cause a lack of ventilators. And so it's not like we have to stock up on every type of medical equipment under the sun. This one was predictable. And yes, it's likely to create waste. Yes, we're likely to have a situation where we, buy a bunch of state-of-the-art ventilators, and then luckily 10 years goes by and this doesn't happen again, and then we have to buy a whole new set. And I would welcome that waste. And I think most American people, especially after going through this, would say at least, we all know it's government waste. We all know there's government waste all over the place, and we can all play the game of like, better to spend on this than something else. But most people are going to look at this, especially after this, and say, at least this is government waste that's geared towards me.
Well,
this is government waste help us. This is looking out for the regular people.
But Sam, where was the political will before this happened? You know, if I went and said, oh, well, we're going to requisition 5% of the government for respiratory illnesses, the American public would have been like, what? What are you talking about? And there's some other group that says, no, internet warfare is next and global warming's next. Like yes, now they'll say that because there's the political will to get these respirators, which is fine.
I want to say this too. What I think that we can all agree on is that there will probably be, and hopefully be, a shift in the mindset of what it means to protect American citizens. And so we've been the constant narrative of this is the fueling of the military industrial complex, and the protecting of Americans is some sort of outside, an external threat from a foreign country. But this is an attack on every country. But if you're thinking about the American mindset, it's an attack on our country that is an internal strife in which we're dealing with. And so I think that what you're going to see is from this, I think that you're going to see a military shift to thinking and dealing with kind of global pandemics, or even the threat of bioterrorism. I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be something that is just a natural occurrence here. We have to start thinking about this in the protection of the world, hopefully. But if you're thinking about American politics, the American mindset of protecting our people in ways that we really didn't think about earnestly before.
And all of this is dwarfed by climate change, probably.
And hopefully we start thinking about the mindset of that too.
That's a big one.
The same mobilization techniques.
That's what a lot of the young climate activists are saying right now. I read this great opinion piece in the Washington Post about a week ago, basically saying, young people are being asked to change our lifestyles in order to save the lives of old people. And old people completely refuse to change their lifestyles in order to save the lives of young people who are going to be feeling the real, public health effects of climate change. And so, in a way, this is a great dry run, because I would say it's a smaller problem. It's clearly a less complex problem. And so, we all can make sacrifices, and we need to start organizing government in a way that is going to, one, make government, lead the way on those sacrifices, but two, help organize and inspire people to do the same. And our government is all about, appeasing the immediate needs of people. And part of that's the way our system's set up. But maybe we can make a little progress in our mindset here.
Well, I like everything you said except the word inspire. That sacrifices must be dictated. Okay, they have to be dictated. And once they're dictated, people accept them. And they often find themselves happier having been forced to sacrifice. But the whole relying on goodwill, I'm not a fan.
Nope, you're right. You're right, because everyone told us to wear masks, and then I just went to Stop and Shop, and everyone was wearing masks.
Yeah.
So,
well, I don't know about that, but I didn't wear a mask.
So, I mean, we've been talking about big government. Do you want to read that other quote, Norm?
Well, you know what? I think that we're at a wrap here right now. I think we can save it.
You want to save it? Yeah, we can definitely save it.
Yeah, if you can pump music for us.
Cool. Let's do it.
Now, folks, we didn't think that piece would last us the whole thing, but it sure did, and I'm glad it did. I think it's an interesting piece, and I think we took it in an interesting direction. I want to thank Prof. Chaos for joining us. He's an old Free Associate chum. And the Whale Dog, of course, on all multitasking control bandwidth genius. And of course, I'm the BIQ, I'm the barbarian in question. And you're listening to the Free Associates. And hopefully you're either listening on Facebook Live or on our podcast platform or on WMUA Amherst, where we rebroadcast it. We want to encourage you guys to stay open, to stay loose, and even during this time, consider what's possible always. Thanks so much and have a great day. Bye-bye.